Hello, and welcome to our webinar. Today, we're talking about topics that are critical for most businesses, especially those in regulated industries. Topics that are top of mind for any chief human resources officer and company CEOs and company general managers. And that's how to create a respectful and safe workplace. Today, the focus is people sustainability. Hi, I'm your host today, Bill Wall, and I've worked for global corporate brands for nearly 40 years with a focus on the technology industry. I'm ever curious and fascinated by the intersection of technology and business and how companies are leveraging technology to meet their ever changing needs. So I'm particularly excited about today's topic and our guest, Sana Salam, founder and CEO of Sodales. We're going to have a great and interesting conversation about people sustainability and how to apply an integrated platform approach to health, safety, and employee relations at the intersection of employee engagement, empowerment, and corporate responsibility. As we progress today, be thinking about your questions, and you can put them right into the Q&A functionality of the Zoom platform, and we'll address them towards the end of our program. So let's get started. Sana, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Will. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
Great to have you with us. Why don't we start first with Sodales? Tell us about your business. And I learned something interesting about the meaning of the name of the company.
Very good. So Dallas is actually a software provider. We're a cloud platform company, and our focus is health, safety, employee, and labor relations. Really a new area for HR functions and even as topic for CFOs and CHROs, just to drive people's sustainability. And that's what our platform does. And the meaning of Dallas is actually a Latin word and it means family. And within our own company, employees come first, and that's how we're able to serve customers. And so we have a big focus on family and employees and personal life as well.
Well, that's great. Sodales has been around a little while now. What's your reach and scope around the world? Where are you primarily doing your business?
So we are based out of Toronto. We have worldwide customers, running on our platform for a couple of years. Some of our largest global customers are World Bank, Lockheed Martin, Walmart Group of Companies, Bobcat, Cargill, Coca-Cola, and many other brand names. Currently, we have clients in pretty much every single continent and region, but primarily in North America.
Well, that's great. And congratulations. Let's start to dig into the topic a little bit. So, my background comes from the ERP space. I know many companies think about supporting the HR function with core ERP in systems like SAP, Oracle, Workday. Where does Sedalis fit in with those core functionality software programs?
So Dallas is really, in nutshell, a picture of a bimodal IT landscape where core HR functions stay within a core platform such as SAP or Workday or Oracle or UKG. And so Dallas is actually an add-on. And the reason for that is that we focus on compliance and more emerging areas that change all the time, pretty much every month or on a yearly basis as the business evolves. And that's why it is more of a layer that gets added on to the core HR. So we are considered as an extension cloud to the HR cloud, and we plug right into the HR processes. So then what we are able to do is bring in health and safety, employee labor relations, and collective bargaining, all of those compliances across HR processes as an integrated, cohesive uh, offering for all the vendors, HR vendors.
So you mentioned a little bit in describing your company areas like health and safety and compliance. Those are traditionally areas that sit outside
Mhm.
the what we tend to think about in terms of the HR department. Sometimes they're in legal, sometimes there's a dedicated safety organization. So is who is the primary customer for Sedalis? Is it the HR leader?
Yes, today it is. So if you look at the history of compliance, especially health and safety and labor relations, these are pretty much departments that worked independently, more in silo and silo systems as well, because it's such a specialized knowledge. And the teams are really small as well and expensive too, because these are lawyers and legal teams in a company. So it's much smaller group in any organization. But we can also see that having this siloed approach resulted in more injuries and more costs for companies when it comes to claims and different types of liabilities that comes with injuries and accidents and union claims. So with time, companies are already looking at an integrated HR component when it comes to these specialized needs for their employees. But on top of that, when the pandemic hits the world, HR became the forefront for employees. So employees, when they have a mental health issue, they have a physical health issue, they have specific questions in the policy, they're calling HR. That's what they're calling. And HR actually became the service center. And that's where they realized they actually need to not only ramp up their knowledge and their access to this information, but they also need to quickly pivot and move around and change their policies as they're getting feedback from the employees so they can make it a less stressful experience for employees to perform in their job. And that's where really there was a perfect marriage of legal, compliance, health and safety, and HR, and even finance to start working in a more collaborative manner. And I think so for us now, HR is really the forefront of driving these capabilities in the company.
I love it when technology and particularly software has the capability to sort of fill gaps. And it sounds
Mhm.
like coming through the pandemic, you and your team have identified areas of the business where there's crossovers to business processes that involve others outside of HR. You're using your software platform to essentially bring those functions together. The software is the glue that brings very siloed corporate functions together. Is that the right way to think about it?
Absolutely. And also the transparency. So the tools have always existed, but I think what we saw from our customers is that they have more than, on average, more than 11 different platforms where they have to go and find information, interpret it, create that picture for an overall policy impact and effectiveness. And despite having the perfect systems and different tools, they still get reports from their employees for poor employee experience. And looking at essential businesses, especially, I can give you example of governments like within Canada. We hear that employees with special needs, especially around disability, actually have the worst employee experience just because that is an area that is underserved as well. And then same thing goes with other diverse segments as well. So the tools have always existed. It just did not have the ability to create a full picture and effectiveness of policy so that you can change policy with time as well and take back.
So I want to move on, but I want to make the finer point here. I think what you were saying about the pandemic and the post-pandemic period is kind of interesting. HR has always been held accountable for employee engagement and retention, employee satisfaction. But a lot of what you were hearing from were employees that felt disenfranchised because of these siloed functions. And they were constantly coming back to HR to say, can you help me solve a problem? Even if that problem was a compliance or health and safety issue,
Mhm.
functions that sat at HR. So your solution is really designed to give HR people the tools to work across those silos.
Yes, and be proactive, right?
Great.
Be to the line. Yeah.
Well, so let's extend a little bit deeper on the topic. We started out today, and you mentioned in your comments the term people sustainability. And I suspect for our audience, that's a relatively new term. We think about sustainability and DEI with an eye towards green lens or more efficient businesses. Can you help our audience understand what is people sustainability?
Yes, sustainability in general is a really big topic right now, especially because with the emerging trends, millennials and Generation Z, they actually want to work for companies that are sustainable. So when the CEOs and CFOs are looking at it, it's really the ESG metric.
Hmm.
But drilling down into it, there's research done by various companies, including McKinsey, that actually drills down into the drivers for an effective ESG result is all around people's sustainability. So that is where the term comes from, is that in any company to drive a profitable result from their ESG policies actually need to create a people sustainability there. And what that means is that empowering and engaging with people along with corporate social responsibility. And you're using the word people, not just employees, because people would mean it's your customers, it's your vendors, it's your providers, it's your business partners. It's all of those processes that touch people around a company because companies are no longer just contained within their organization. They're part of a bigger community or industry. And I think that's where this terminology comes
So you talked about profitability, and I know that that's important for literally anybody that's listening to this webcast. But people don't always think about employee engagement and employee retention with an eye towards profitability. They may feel that those things are in a bit of a tug of war. So people sustainability tries to be all encompassing across these topics. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So we can take some examples. Let's take an example of, for example, a utility sector company.
Hmm.
And actually, we have several customers in utility sector across the globe. And one of their biggest area to look at is that they have to drive sustainable billing to be able to make sure they are running a profitable business. To do that, they need to contain and maintain skill sets. And those skill sets actually come from their unions because those are really highly specialized skill set around gas or electric workers or steel workers. And they need to maintain those stopping commitments to be able to meet their revenue goals so they can avoid any type of turnover or skill set loss. To be able to do that, this is exactly where people sustainability comes into picture, is that they need to tie the policies, the relationships with unions, the relationships with the employees, and making sure they're giving a, a workplace where people have good working conditions so that they can also maintain and retain those talents. And if they retain those talents, they're actually able to create a profitable and sustainable forecast for their
Mhm.
business as well and manage it great.
I
So it's
think I
just an
understand.
example that ties it.
I think I understand the concept here. We think about people sustainability as an all encompassing topic that covers some of the disciplines which are unique to managing people. You talked about growth and training, empowerment, but you've also talked about um, building skill sets and employee relations like union relations. We should then think about people sustainability as a sort of all encompassing way to put your arms around everything that relates to the people side of the business. Is that the right way to
Yes,
think about it?
you said it perfectly. Yes, that's exactly what it is. It's all about like bringing people, policies, and processes together. And that just means it's not just creating awareness about it and enforcing it and making sure that it's sustained over a period of time and improved as well.
When McKinsey writes about it, and you've got some interesting links to the McKinsey work on your website, um, they see this as a C-suite imperative around positive business outcomes. Um, but people sustainability is just not about revenue and profit. It
Mhm.
but it's about things like employee retention and employee engagement. Those things ladder up, I think, to profit and efficiency and the ability of the company to grow. But this is not just a dollars and cents set of topics, right?
Absolutely. So I think what the additional element of this research where they found that ESG, the baseline and the underlying success criteria for an effective and profitable ESG policy is actually people sustainability. One more element that they found through that research was that if you do it this way, if you actually make people sustainability as the heart of your company goals and company culture, you actually gain more benefits. Not only you create a collaborative work
Mm.
environment, because now all the processes are integrated and people are really at the center of it and they're preferred um, element of that. Not only that happens, but also you foster innovation because now you're bringing different brain powers together, different departments together that actually serve each other and actually break down a lot of corporate barriers. You create a respectful workplace where people are feeling engaged and they can see that they have a voice at the table. And then finally, you also reduce your risk as a company because a lot of the companies could actually lose good talent or even have a reputation risk if departments are not working in a collaborative manner. And a big example of that is really the transportation sector, where we see, the drivers carrying very, very dangerous stuff sometimes in the train, but they are required to work certain number of hours, certain number of routes, and certain work conditions. This is exactly what people's sustainability helps with.
It's interesting because it makes me want to sort of circle back to a comment you made earlier, which is the concepts of employee relations. So, for
Mhm.
example, working with unions or compliance and safety, which is traditionally sort of laddered up to the legal side of the business. These are not new concepts, but the concept of people sustainability, which is the company's ability to think holistically about all aspects of its relationships with its peoples. Um, that thinking about that holistically is what's new here. And it's the requirement for HR to meet the challenge that whether it has it formally or informally, people count on the CHRO and his or her team to sort of own all of these things, even when organizationally they don't own them. So the technology platform gives them the capability to bring the piece parts together. It's thinking about it holistically, which is this new concept that McKinsey's written so much about.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. I think two things are happening. The first is that the workplace landscape is changing. So traditionally, companies would look at their workforce and they would need to every year reskill or upskill their employees to be able to meet the demands of the market. But now the focus is not just upskilling and reskilling employees, it's actually also to go after those underserved segments. So, for example, women, people with color, people with certain types of religion, or people with certain types of medical needs, and making an inclusive work environment. So, the first is that the fact that the workplace landscape is changing. The second element that is we are seeing is that one thing that the pandemic taught us is that just having this compliance knowledge and just on the compliance team, because usually that's a very small team, is not enough. So I actually need to build this knowledge within the field teams, within the supervisors. So to be able to do that, they are calling it a proactive compliance strategy. So you're not acting, for example, if there is a problem at a work site at a dangerous height where people are working at a dangerous height, for example, um, companies don't want to have to respond to it afterwards. They want to actually be proactive about it. And which is why they're looking for ways to empower these supervisors or field workers with that knowledge. And because it's such a specialized knowledge, it's not that easy to empower them with. They actually then need easy user experience and employee experience to push that out to their teams. And this is exactly where those policies that used to be written in those booklets and big binders that we used to sign in the old days are now actually spread across processes.
So it's interesting that you should say that because if we think about the typical corporate structure, the owners for some of these processes sit outside HR. And you mentioned earlier that a lot of your engagements are directly with CHROs. And I suspect a lot of the people that will listen to this webinar today are coming from the HR function. The software empowers the owners of, say, compliance or the safety office, as two examples, or the employee relations office to be engaged in partnership with the CHRO to use the software so that everyone's looking at the same picture of people sustainability. Is that right?
That is absolutely right. And I think it's that picture, but also being able to drill down and exactly nailing down the problem. So, because at the end of the day, the goal is not just to roll out a process, the goal is to improve the process. To be able to do that, you need transparency. So, there's a lot of study, for example, in public sector that in public sector where, policies are actually made, they still don't have good tools to measure the effectiveness of those policies and they need transparency. So yes, that is exactly what you described as transparency and access to information, bringing it all together.
The the ownership of people's sustainability feels a lot to me like I live in the corporate reputation space. I often say that reputation is owned by the chief communication officer, but at the end of the day, the chief reputation officer tends to be the CEO or the general manager, whoever's ultimately in charge in the organization. Here, I certainly can understand your primary customer being the CHRO, but I understand how a compliance officer or a legal officer or a safety officer also feels ownership the end of the day, the person responsible for all people winds up being the CEO, who is ultimately the owner of people sustainability at a typical customer.
Well, nowadays we're seeing it really at the C level, CEO, CHRO, CIO, and whoever is basically driving an overall employee experience transformation across the organization. This is a key topic that they would have as a focus on. So, and a recent example we have from aerospace company. Their CEO's goal was to actually provide different tools for people with certain religious needs and medical needs. And he needed to achieve that very, very quickly. And that is exactly people's sustainability topic that needed to be addressed in this large scale um, aerospace and defense company. We've then seen that repeated across several organizations of the same sector. So I think to really answer that, it does vary sector to sector, industry to industry. We've seen in, for example, in public sector, it's mainly being driven by CHRO. You've seen in manufacturing and construction, it's being driven by CIO, but it's really that C-suite layer that's driving the change.
It's interesting that you should say that because one of the challenges for these types of softwares is to make sure that the IT organization is best set up for success here. They're not traditionally involved in the soft skills associated with people, but this is a technology solution. So, what are your engagements like with CIOs and their tech teams to support this kind of work?
Yes. I think the first thing, okay, so we'll start with the first thing that we are seeing in the market working with CIOs is that they're all about agility. They don't want to build anything that's fixated. They actually pay more for an agile solution or agile technology where they can constantly change. And this is because they don't want to be look like an old school department serving the business because then they don't have good partnerships with the business. And to do that, there are a lot of criteria. I think one of the criteria they have is that the platforms that they're investing in need to have that specialized capability, but also need to have the ability to extend if needed as the business changes. They also want to see it in real time that they can actually change and adapt with just non-technology knowledge. So this is also important. The CIOs are looking for products or technologies where non-technological knowledge can also support an ongoing update. In addition, they're looking at an enterprise-wide need. So they're trying to break the silos. So, for example, a very unique aspect that you've seen recently is integrating, for example, employee relations, labor relations across customer service, bringing positive disciplines across corporate teams. So these were some of the new emerging trends that we have not seen before. And to be able to do that, CIOs are looking for agility, and our interaction with them is not so much as a tech stack, actually. It's actually at the business goals and futuristic thinking.
So they are thinking about this the way that they have often talked about CIOs as innovators in the business. They're
Mhm.
creating an opportunity for innovation. In this case, it happens to be on the people sustainability side of the house. I'm assuming for CIOs, the ability for a solution like yours to easily and from a certified perspective integrate with their ERP system. I know you're an SAP partner, for example. That's critically important for the technology people to make sure that this is a proven solution that plugs in to their existing ERP environment in a way that's technologically sound from a security, data protection, functionality perspective, correct?
Yes, absolutely. That would be for only the employee component. When we look at many sectors, they have non-employees working with them as well. That would be contractors, union reps. And there is a big focus in showing and demonstrating that companies are investing in technology and investing in good relationships. So to be able to do that, actually these are third party organizations that also need access to the same tools. So everyone is looking at the same information at the same time. Healthcare is a good example, transportation, utility, higher education is a good example. So they have a lot of non-employee um, type of, I would say, people component that's critical for them. So it's actually to be able to cater to both types of user groups. that exists in ERP and outside of ERP as well.
You've talked, and we've mentioned together on this webinar the term regulated a lot. It feels like for regulated businesses who spend a lot of time thinking about and reporting on compliance, this is a particularly important topic. I assume it's important for any business, but are you seeing most of your traction in the so called regulated industries?
Absolutely. So there are two differences when it comes to regulated industries. And let me define what regulated industries are.
Mhm.
So in general, in the category of cluster of industries, these are public sector, healthcare, higher education, construction, manufacturing, and transportation. So highly regulated, and of course, telecom is part of like the utility umbrella. And they also could be considered as public services industries. That's a cluster of the industry that's called. But two things happen in these industries. Very interesting. Number one, they're essential businesses. What that means is if the world gets hit by any new challenge or crisis, these industries must still perform to be able to allow the world to operate. Secondly, they're actually governed by not just HR policies, but also union collective bargaining agreements
Mhm.
where they have to legally comply with union rules, requirements, and something called a collective bargaining agreement. In some cases, especially in transportation and railway, they're extremely complex. And one of the big focus now is that unions are actually negotiating good workplace or safe workplace requirements in their agreement. And as companies don't provide that, it can actually result in massive strikes and impact on business. A big focus we are seeing is on workplace violence.
Mhm.
That's becoming a really important topic in higher education, healthcare. We're also seeing thefts and safety when it comes to people who are working in construction and manufacturing. So similarly, there are different types of negotiation that unions and companies are doing. So that makes it more complex and mandatory as well.
In addition to the types of companies,
Mhm.
one observation that I think has really bubbled up in this post pandemic phase is how diverse the workforces are today. We've got everything from baby boomers to Gen Zers and in between. And those employee groups have very different expectations about their engagement with the business. Uh, that probably adds to the demand for the capability to look universally at people sustainability topics because these employee groups are so diverse. Are you seeing that in your conversations with customers?
Absolutely. So on average, our customers have up to 5 generations at work.
Mhm.
Five. And especially in construction manufacturing, we can see that. When you look at some of the global companies, they actually also have they don't they're not defined in one industry anymore. They have multiple industries operating under one business line. So they're constantly catering to more than one or three up to 5 generations at the same time, which creates a problem, but also an opportunity. First of all, having the right tools would allow them to attract the talent and constantly fulfill the gap, the skill set gap, the new skills that they require. But also they need to find a way to take the knowledge that has been built it's a company legacy and then distribute that as well, which is I think where technology can play a big role. And yes, we do see that.
If we think about this post pandemic period, a lot of what we saw coming out of the pandemic was labeled, certainly McKinsey talked about it, but many others, as the great resignation. And there was this enormous focus on hiring, retention, and employee engagement. I'd have to think, even though those patterns are starting to shift a little bit now as people are returning more to a hybrid environment, that's put a lot of pressure on CHROs and the C suites to be thinking about people's sustainability, right? Because the cost of turnover, however it comes up, is a significant drain on the business. Are you seeing that as a continuing driver as people are asking about how to solve some of these problems?
Absolutely. Yes, I think there was an emergency period, and companies who had some level of emergency preparedness went in and invested in tools that they had to, processes. They changed the processes, but now the time is where they're actually implementing the lessons learned so that they can actually have a more sustainable growth going forward and also have the same level of emergency preparedness
Mhm.
and have a holistic approach. So one of the things, for example, very simple and basic um, thing that we are noticing is that as companies are now purchasing or are looking at HR software, they want to be able to have the ability to have one place where employees can interact or more like an interaction center for their questions.
Mhm.
Simple, just can their questions be answered? Do they have access to easily search and find their policies?
Yep.
Can they ask, can they raise questions on basic cases? Can they, reach out and request their modified duties, for example, if they are injured? Can they do that quickly? And something we saw in police workforce, for example, they have some of their most intelligent and savvy officers who are maybe working now behind the desk because they've faced an injury. But now there's a big focus in the police workforce to bring in better tools for claims and disability management in police sector. So each sector is looking at areas of improvement and finding those quick wins to bring that employee experience to the next level, employee engagement that would then result in better level of people sustainability.
You mentioned when you were talking about Sodales as a business, some pretty impressive brand names of companies that you count in your customer ranks. Those companies at that enterprise level tend often to think about KPIs and business performance metrics. In the HR space, a measure of employee engagement or a measure of retention or effectiveness of hiring are typical quantitative measures. How do people measure the success of people's sustainability, and what can the technology do to help them keep an eye on their progress?
Yes, multiple ways. So, in most of these projects, there will be something called design principles, where companies do define their company level strategy and goals for each of the area. For example, diversity. For example, we want to hire more than 12% women in our leadership, for example. They can say that. Or they would say, we want to have a 50% reduction in our union grievances.
Mhm.
Or they can say that we want to add more high value uh, clauses for our unions. They could also have cost related goals as well. So they first of all define the goals at the program level, which they call as their design principles. And then from there, it basically drills down. They also can say, okay, we want to reduce the time that it takes to investigate or correct a non-conformity, because that would drive trust and
Mhm.
transparency. Because they always say, like, how can you measure trust and transparency? This is exactly how you do it. So they define that first, and then as they are either rolling out processes and procedures and tools or technology, there is a feedback. So most companies are conducting surveys after. For example, they would have survey to ask question at the end of a process. Are you satisfied that your request was addressed? Or they would also, in some cases, they've measured that um, by utilizing technology, the actually claims and grievances went down in terms of number, but they had a much higher number of cases compared to the last year.
Mhm.
That means that people are trusting the system to log their cases, to log their questions, and as they're getting addressed, it's closing exactly at that moment and not turning into a grievance or a claim or a problem. So I think having all of that in one place is really helping. And these are some of the metrics that they would define and then measure through surveys and feedback.
That's great, Son. I want to remind our audience as we head towards the final 10 minutes of our program that they can submit their questions into the Q&A functionality here in the Zoom program, and we'll try to address some of those questions as we continue. I'd like to take one of the questions that came in from the web earlier, Sana, and I think you just talked a little bit about DE&I. But how can organizations ensure themselves that people's sustainability initiatives are inclusive and promote diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I think that goes to your point about how to track results. Thank the person for submitting the question. How do companies assure that they're heading in the right direction that way?
Yes, so several ways. So within GNI, it's really a broad topic. Companies are, in our case, for example, customers do have a focus now with people of color, certain type of gender, religion. and various other types of diversity aspects.
Hmm.
Many of our customers actually have a goal to have 4 to 5 aspects met with, and even at the time of hiring, that there's something that they're measuring. So it starts from just beginning, starting from the hiring process and all the way to various HR processes that touch the people. So they can measure that through reporting and tools and technologies that are available to them. So um, starting from recruitment, starting from even if you look at health and safety, case management, an example that the companies are looking at is, okay, do we have less number of harassment cases this year?
Hmm.
And then within harassment, they have all of these different D&I components that they're measuring. Another one that they're looking at is that requesting and accommodating employees' needs. Um, so being proactive about it. So an example is that we have several customers in, for example, customer service role where they have a lot of females working and they would need a special type of chair to cater to a height or to cater
Hmm.
to their special need. And our company is providing that ability as part of the employee employee service. So those are some of the areas that they could measure it and implement programs as well. When it comes to, for example, religious needs, when we look at aerospace, there are certain types of religious needs that, including prayer rule and, topics around travel and certain seasons that companies are now catering
Hmm.
towards. And they want to make sure that employees have access to those tools where they can request it and companies listening to them. So I think that those are some of the areas that they would look at, but it would start by looking at just the diversity data that they have and then looking at where do we want to reach. In public sector, for example, right now there's a big focus to have a higher percentage of women and then designing
Right.
processes around women development.
Another question that we got from the web was as you talk to customers and you're watching how they use this software, what are some of the best practices for promoting people's sustainability in the workplace?
I think change management. So we've seen that in companies where change management was involved from the beginning, it
Hmm.
was very successful. But in companies where it was, just a process and there's technology and tool investments and you're using it, but you're not really understanding it, and employees don't really understand how it empowers them, good investment in change management really drove that adoption and the feedback loop where employees actually felt that this is not just another tool or another process that's been given to us, actually understood why it will help
Hmm.
them. I think that was key. Secondly, executive sponsorship and
Yeah.
executive communication. So in situation where a C-level executive was involved in key communication at the time of launch or pre-launch, was also something that we noticed really helped out in driving the importance of such change.
When we look at best practices, let's flip the coin over. What are some of the common challenges that you see that organizations are having when they're trying to drive people sustainability? How do they overcome them?
I think the big one is trying to do too much at the same time. So when we look at different topics, for example, DNI, wellness, health and safety, transparency, employee relations, these are a lot of topics that
Hmm.
touch many aspects of the company, but also business and operations. Trying to do too much at the same time can be problematic for them because there's a lot of communication that needs to be managed with external parties as well.
Right.
So, but at the same time, they need agility. So, creating a roadmap. So, not having a roadmap is, I would say, and then I would say figuring if companies don't know what element of this is going to bring the most value, I think that's where they fail. So, we've seen and situations where a CHR got involved, ran a survey, and they figure out, okay, you know what, we need to focus on just people with special needs right now. And they got that piece done.
Mhm.
Or we need to focus on our union recruitment process right now. And they got that piece done. Or we need to reduce our grievances. How can we do that? And, they focus on that. So I think focusing on specific areas and then really staggering them in a almost like a release cycle and agile rollouts really helped out.
I'm always happy when people submit questions they like the conversation, and that's great. I'd also want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I want to close with a topic that is really important, which is you've talked about a lot of, and you just said these are very big, meaty areas for companies to think about, as varied as employee engagement all the way to health and safety, from compliance all the way to retention. And some people listening to this conversation might say, okay, I get the topic, but I don't know where to get started. What's your advice to businesses, large, medium, and small, who are thinking, all right, I want to be better at people sustainability, but I just don't know how to get started? What's your advice to them?
I think just by starting from looking at your last year's data, most companies would have a basic survey tool, and getting employee feedback would help. Um, if we look at our own company, we conduct surveys internally as well, and we get feedback. And okay, so work life balance, for example, would be a topic we would focus on, or more flexible hours. So just starting by looking at your recent year's data would be the first starting point. And then from there, prioritizing your most important key goals for the next few years, and then making sure they tie back to the overall company strategy and goals as well. So this would mean making sure that it's done in a profitable way.
You mentioned through the course of this conversation some things that I have been hearing about software projects since I first came into the IT industry far too many years ago to mention, which is executive sponsorship, important. Mapping key goals, important. I suspect you would agree. Having the right partners surrounding you so that you have the right advice and support to get the project done. And I think one of the most important things you said a few minutes ago is not trying to solve it all at once.
Mhm.
Find that pain point, address it, get some quick victories, and continue to march forward. Are all of those ways that customers can be successful in these kinds of projects?
Absolutely. And the overarching, I would say the message would be fit to standard.
Mm.
There are other companies in your industry who have done it or are doing it. Be open to changing your process or policies to fit to standard. So that could mean going back to your unions and renegotiating, back to your legal and renegotiating. But fitting to standard would allow you to get that agility, but also be a more modern company where you're actually following those industry best practices.
Great advice, Sana. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. It was great to hear your perspective on the topic of people sustainability.
My pleasure.
I'd like to thank Sana Salam, CEO and founder of Sodales Solutions, and for all of you for joining our webinar today. We want to keep the discussion going on this topic, and Sodales has a wealth of materials and case studies on its website. You can engage directly with Sana and the team at Sodales, of course, through LinkedIn, Facebook, and their website page. That's sodalessolutions.com. Sodales is Sodales, solutions.com. And keep the discussion going. This is an emerging topic and a technology player that is certainly in the middle of all of it. On behalf of everyone at Sodales and the team that put together today's webcast, I'm your host, Bill Wall. Thanks for joining us today. We'll talk again soon.